Welcome to the Box of Redemption, a story where every choice unravels a dangerous mystery and every secret carries a deadly cost. What would you do if a stranger handed you a key to your family's darkest past? A past tied to betrayal, corruption, and a legacy of lies. Mateus Correa thought he was just helping a stranded man on the road. But that single act of kindness pulls him into a relentless game of cat and mouse, where the fate of his family, his father's name, and even his own life hang by a thread. Who is pulling the strings? What's hidden inside the mysterious box? And most importantly, can Mateus uncover the truth before it destroys everything he loves? Stay with me as we dive into a story filled with suspense, danger, and a race against time. But beware, this journey may leave you questioning who to trust. Let's begin. The sun blazed down mercilessly as Mateus gripped the steering wheel, his eyes darting to the clock on the dashboard. He was late. The client meeting he'd been planning for weeks was slipping through his fingers, and the narrow rural road ahead seemed endless. His car's air conditioning hummed at full blast, barely keeping the sweltering heat at bay. "Perfect," he muttered under his breath, glancing at the empty stretch of asphalt ahead. The countryside blurred past him, a mix of tall grass and distant farmhouses. He tightened his grip on the wheel, his frustration mounting. Suddenly, his focus was broken by a strange sight up ahead. A beat-up old sedan was parked haphazardly on the side of the road, steam curling out from under its hood. Next to it, an elderly man in a faded shirt was struggling to push the car forward. His movements were slow, labored, and it was clear he wasn't making much progress. Mateus's foot hesitated over the gas pedal. He couldn't afford to stop, not now. He wasn't some roadside service, and besides, someone else would come along eventually, right? The words "keep driving" repeated in his mind, but the scene of the man, hunched and exhausted, seemed to anchor his car to the pavement. "Damn it," Mateus muttered, pulling over a few feet ahead of the sedan. He grabbed a bottle of water from the console, stepped out of his car, and instantly regretted it as the heat hit him like a wall. "Hey," he called out, walking toward the man. "Need some help?" The old man straightened up slowly, wiping his brow with a trembling hand. His face was lined with age, his eyes tired but kind. "Bless you, son," the man said, his voice hoarse. "The engine overheated and the darn thing won't start. Been trying to push it to the shade, but..." He trailed off, gesturing weakly to the nearest tree, which seemed a mile away. Mateus sighed. "Let's get it off the road first," he said, setting the bottle of water on the car's roof. Together, they pushed. The sedan groaned and resisted at first, but Mateus's strength and the man's determination slowly got it rolling. Sweat trickled down Mateus's back, soaking his shirt, and his arms burned from the effort. After what felt like an eternity, the car was safely parked under the shade of an oak tree. Mateus leaned against the hood, panting. "Thanks," the old man said, taking the water bottle and sipping it gratefully. "I didn't think anyone would stop. Folks just drive right past these days." Mateus waved it off. "It's no big deal," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. He checked his watch and winced. The meeting was a lost cause now. The old man seemed to notice his distraction. "In a hurry?" he asked, his eyes sharp despite his frail appearance. "Yeah," Mateus admitted. "I had a meeting, important one too, but it's fine. I guess it'll wait." The old man smiled, a slow, thoughtful expression. "Funny how life works, isn't it? Sometimes the things we think are urgent aren't what really matter." Mateus frowned, unsure how to respond. He wasn't in the mood for philosophical musings from a stranger. "Here," the man said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, weathered notebook and scribbled something on the corner of a page. Tearing it off, he handed it to Mateus. "Take this. Call me if you're ever in trouble or need a favor." Mateus looked at the paper, his name scrawled neatly next to a phone number. "Thanks, but really it's okay," he said, holding it awkwardly. "Keep it," the man insisted, his tone kind but firm. You never know when you might need a hand. And remember this, son. You never know how a small act of kindness might change someone's path. The words hung in the air, heavier than the heat pressing down on them. Mateus hesitated, then folded the paper and slipped it into his wallet. As he got back into his car, Mateus glanced in the rearview mirror. The old man was already walking toward the shade, his silhouette framed by the dappled light of the oak tree. Mateus started the engine and pulled back onto the road. He didn't get far before his phone buzzed on the dashboard. It was a call from his wife, Livia. Mateus. Livia's voice was strained, urgent. You need to get to the hospital. It's Julia. His blood ran cold. What happened? She collapsed at school, Livia said, her voice breaking. The doctors are running tests, but they think it's serious. Mateus's hands tightened on the wheel as his pulse thundered in his ears. Without another word, he spun the car around, his mind racing. The road stretched ahead of him, empty and endless. But now every second felt like a lifetime. He thought of the old man's words, echoing faintly in his mind. You never know how a small act of kindness might change someone's path. He floored the gas pedal, not realizing just how true those words would soon prove to be. Cliffhanger. Mateus reaches the hospital, but as he walks into Julia's room, he sees something unexpected on the bedside table. A crumpled piece of paper with the same phone number the old man had given him. The tires screeched as Mateus pulled into the hospital parking lot, his heart pounding in his chest. The evening sun was dipping below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city. But Mateus barely noticed. His mind was consumed by fear. Fear for Julia, his bright, curious daughter who never seemed to run out of energy. The thought of her collapsing was unimaginable. And yet here he was, running toward the hospital entrance like a man whose world was crumbling. Inside, the air was sterile and cold, the fluorescent lights humming faintly. Mateus approached the reception desk, struggling to catch his breath. Julia Correa, he said hurriedly. She was brought in earlier today. Where is she? The nurse behind the desk gave him a sympathetic look and checked her screen. Room 206, second floor, she said. Mateus nodded, muttering a quick thank you, before sprinting to the elevator. He jabbed the button repeatedly, as if that would make the doors close faster, then tapped his foot anxiously as the elevator climbed. When the doors opened, Livia was waiting for him in the hallway. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen. As soon as she saw Mateus, she rushed toward him, collapsing into his arms. I came as soon as I could, he said, his voice shaking. What happened? Livia stepped back, wiping her eyes. She collapsed during gym class. The school called an ambulance, and she's been here ever since. The doctors, they're still running tests. Her voice broke, and Mateus saw fresh tears welling up in her eyes. He placed his hands on her shoulders, steadying her. She'll be okay, he said, though the words felt hollow. He needed to believe it as much as she did. Together, they entered Julia's room. She was lying on the hospital bed, her small frame looking even smaller against the stark white sheets. Monitors beeped steadily, their rhythms both reassuring and unnerving. Julia's eyes fluttered open as they approached. Dad, she said weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. Mateus forced a smile, sitting beside her and taking her hand. Hey, sweetheart, how are you feeling? Sleepy, Julia replied, her lips curving into a faint smile. Mom's been crying a lot. Mateus glanced at Livia, who gave a half-hearted laugh despite herself. She's just worried about you, he said, brushing a strand of hair from Julia's forehead. A doctor entered the room, clipboard in hand. His expression was calm but professional, giving nothing away. Mr. and Mrs. Correa, he said, nodding to each of them. We've completed the initial tests, but we'll need more time to determine what's causing Julia's symptoms. For now, we're monitoring her closely and keeping her hydrated. What are you testing for? Mateus asked, his voice edged with panic. The doctor hesitated. We're looking at a range of possibilities, including metabolic disorders or an underlying cardiac condition. I understand this is difficult, but we need to remain cautious until we have more information. Livia clutched Mateus's arm, her face pale. How long will it take? She asked, her voice trembling. It could be a few days before we have conclusive results, the doctor replied. In the meantime, we'll keep Julia comfortable and under observation. As the doctor left, the weight of his words settled heavily over the room. Mateus felt like he was suffocating. Days? How were they supposed to endure days of not knowing? That night, Livia stayed by Julia's bedside while Mateus went home to gather some clothes and necessities. The house was eerily silent when he walked in, the kind of silence that made every sound echo painfully. He dropped his keys on the kitchen counter and slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. His thoughts raced. Hospital bills, possible diagnoses, the helplessness of not being able to fix this for Julia. His eyes drifted to the crumpled piece of paper in his wallet. "Call me if you're ever in trouble," Alfredo had said. Mateus pulled out his phone and stared at the number, hesitating. What could Alfredo do? He was just an old man with a broken-down car. Still, something about the encounter lingered in Mateus's mind. The certainty in Alfredo's voice, the weight of his words. Shaking his head, Mateus stuffed the paper back into his wallet. He needed sleep, not cryptic advice. The next morning, Mateus returned to the hospital with a bag of clothes for Livia and Julia's favorite stuffed animal, a worn-out rabbit she called Bun Bun. Julia was awake, watching cartoons on the small TV mounted in the corner. She brightened when she saw Mateus. "You brought Bun Bun," she exclaimed, her voice still weak but filled with delight. "I couldn't leave him behind," Mateus said, handing her the toy. He sat beside her bed, watching as she hugged the rabbit tightly. Livia joined him, her face etched with exhaustion. "The hospital called this morning," she said quietly. "They're estimating the cost for Julia's stay. It's a lot, Mateus." "How much?" he asked, already dreading the answer. She handed him a piece of paper with the estimate. Mateus's stomach dropped. The number was staggering, far more than they could afford. "We have some savings," Livia said, her voice shaking. "But not enough. We'll need to take out loans or find another way," Mateus interrupted, though he had no idea what that other way might be. Later that day, Mateus stepped outside for air, his mind churning with worry. He leaned against the side of the hospital, staring at the parking lot as if it might hold the answers he needed. When he returned to Julia's room, he found Livia holding an envelope, her face a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "This was left at the nurse's station for us," she said, handing it to Mateus. He opened the envelope cautiously. Inside was a stack of cash, more than enough to cover Julia's initial hospital bills. There was no note, no explanation, just the money. Mateus's first thought was disbelief. His second was suspicion. "Who would leave this?" he asked, looking at Livia. "I don't know," she said, her voice unsteady. "But what if it's a blessing? What if someone just wanted to help?" Mateus frowned. He didn't believe in blessings, at least not ones that came anonymously. His thoughts drifted back to Alfredo, to the strange sense of purpose in his words. Could it be him? Cliffhanger. Mateus decides to find Alfredo and demand answers, but when he calls the number, the voice on the other end says, "Alfredo? He passed away months ago." Mateus stood frozen, his phone pressed to his ear as the words echoed in his mind. Alfredo passed away months ago. The voice on the other end was calm, almost indifferent, as if they had said something entirely ordinary. But to Mateus, it felt like the ground had just been ripped out from under him. "That can't be right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I met him 2 days ago. He was alive. We talked, and he even gave me his number." The person on the other end, a woman, sighed softly. "I'm sorry, but you must be mistaken. Alfredo Gomez was my uncle. He passed away in May. You must have gotten the number from someone else. Mateus felt his grip tighten on the phone. Is there any chance he could have, I don't know, been mistaken for dead or faked his death? The question sounded ridiculous even to him, but he clung to it like a lifeline. No, the woman said firmly. He died of a heart attack at his home, surrounded by family. We buried him in Sal Vicente Cemetery. If you're certain you met someone claiming to be Alfredo, then I don't know what to tell you. Maybe it was someone using his name. Mateus muttered a quick thank you and hung up, his mind racing. None of this made sense. How could Alfredo be dead? He'd seen him, spoken to him. He could still hear Alfredo's voice clearly, offering him that torn piece of paper with his number. But if Alfredo was truly gone, then who was the man Mateus met? Back at the hospital, Mateus sat in Julia's room, his head in his hands. Livia was asleep in the corner chair, exhausted from the long day. Julia had finally drifted off as well, her small chest rising and falling in rhythm with the beeping of the monitors. Mateus stared at the envelope of money on the bedside table. He'd been carrying it around like a question mark, unable to decide whether it was a gift or a trap. Now, with the revelation about Alfredo, the mystery deepened. The next morning, Mateus returned home briefly to shower and change. As he passed the kitchen counter, he noticed a piece of paper Alfredo had given him. Sitting where he'd left it, he picked it up, scrutinizing the name and phone number scrawled on it. The handwriting was unmistakably the same as on the envelope's accompanying note. Bold, clean, and deliberate. This wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. Determined to find answers, Mateus decided to retrace his steps. He got back in his car and drove to the rural road where he'd first encountered Alfredo. The road stretched out before him, a familiar ribbon of asphalt cutting through fields and trees. He slowed as he approached the oak tree where he'd helped Alfredo push the car. Pulling over, Mateus stepped out and scanned the area. The tree cast long shadows across the dusty ground, and the silence was only broken by the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze. It felt surreal to be standing there again. The car was gone, of course, and there were no signs that anyone had been there recently. But Mateus's instincts told him he wasn't imagining things. As he walked around the tree, his foot caught on something hard and metallic. He looked down and saw a small, dented metal thermos lying half buried in the dirt. Picking it up, he noticed faint scratches along the side. Wiping the grime away, he saw a name engraved on it, Lucas. Mateus frowned. Alfredo hadn't mentioned anyone named Lucas. Could this belong to someone who knew him? Stuffing the thermos into his bag, Mateus got back in his car and continued driving. If there was a connection, he needed to find it. The nearest sign of civilization was a small community about 5 kilometers down the road, a cluster of modest homes and a gas station at its center. Stopping at the gas station, Mateus approached the elderly attendant behind the counter. "Excuse me," he began, holding up the thermos. "Do you know anyone around here named Lucas?" The man adjusted his glasses, squinting at the thermos. "Lucas, huh? Yeah, I know a Lucas. Lives with his grandma a couple of streets down. Nice kid. Do you know where I can find him?" Mateus asked. The attendant gave him directions, and soon Mateus was standing in front of a small, weathered house at the edge of the community. The front yard was overgrown, with patches of wildflowers sprouting between weeds. He knocked on the door, his heart racing. A woman in her 60s opened the door, her face cautious but kind. "Can I help you?" "Hi," Mateus said, suddenly unsure how to explain himself. "I'm looking for Lucas. I think he might be connected to someone I met recently, a man named Alfredo." The woman's expression softened. "You mean my grandson," she said. "Lucas, come here. Someone's here to see you." Moments later, a boy of about 12 appeared behind her, his face lighting up when he saw Mateus. "Oh, it's you," Lucas exclaimed, as if he'd been expecting him. Mateus blinked, startled. "You know me?" "Of course. Lucas said, grinning. "You're the guy from the road. I've been waiting for you to show up." Mateus glanced at the grandmother, who shrugged. "He doesn't usually talk like that," she said. "But come in. You can explain while I make us some tea." Inside, the house was simple but cozy, with faded furniture and family photos lining the walls. Lucas led Mateus to a small dining table and sat across from him, his grin never fading. "I don't understand," Mateus said. "How do you know me?" Lucas's expression grew serious. "After you helped Alfredo, he came here. He told me to keep this for you." The boy reached into a drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope, sliding it across the table to Mateus. Mateus stared at it, his pulse quickening. The envelope was identical to the one he'd found at the hospital, plain and unmarked except for his name. "He said you'd come looking for it," Lucas added. Mateus tore the envelope open, revealing a folded piece of paper. His hands trembled as he read the message inside. "My debt to you began years ago. Follow the path and you'll understand." Beneath the note was a map, hand-drawn and marked with an X near the outskirts of the community. Mateus looked at Lucas, his voice hoarse. "Did he tell you what this means?" The boy shook his head. "No, he just said you'd figure it out when the time was right." Cliffhanger. As Mateus steps out of the house, he notices a black car parked down the street. Its windows are tinted, and it feels out of place in the humble neighborhood. The engine roars to life as soon as he approaches, speeding off before he can get a closer look. Mateus stood on the porch, his eyes fixed on the black car disappearing down the road. The engine's roar echoed in the quiet neighborhood, leaving a trail of unease in its wake. Who was in the car? Why had they been watching? Lucas joined him outside, carrying the empty thermos Mateus had brought. "Something wrong, mister?" the boy asked, noticing Mateus's furrowed brow. Mateus hesitated. "That car," he said, gesturing toward the street. "Did you recognize it? It looked out of place." Lucas shook his head. "Never seen it before. People around here don't drive fancy cars like that." Mateus nodded, though the sight of the vehicle gnawed at him. It felt deliberate, as though someone was keeping tabs on him. But why? He stuffed the unease into the back of his mind and turned back to Lucas. "Thanks for the envelope," he said, "and for keeping it safe." Lucas grinned. "No problem. Alfredo was a good man. He helped a lot of people around here." Mateus's heart clenched at the mention of Alfredo. Was he really gone? Or was this entire mystery a riddle he hadn't solved yet? He unfolded the map again, his eyes tracing the rough lines leading to the marked X near the outskirts of town. "What do you think this is?" he asked, holding it up for Lucas to see. Lucas studied it, his expression thoughtful. "That's near the old mill," he said. "Nobody goes there anymore. It's all abandoned now." "Why would Alfredo want me to go there?" Mateus murmured, more to himself than to Lucas. Lucas shrugged. "You'll find out, I guess." "Want me to come with you?" Mateus smiled faintly at the boy's enthusiasm, but shook his head. "I'll go alone. Stay here with your grandma." Lucas looked disappointed but nodded. "Okay, but be careful. That place is creepy." The drive to the mill took Mateus down winding roads that seemed to stretch endlessly into nowhere. The landscape grew wilder as he approached, with dense trees crowding the edges of the pavement and vines creeping over rusted fences. When he arrived, he parked his car a short distance away, not wanting to draw attention if someone else was nearby. The mill loomed ahead like a forgotten relic, its towering structure weathered by time. Broken windows stared down at him like hollow eyes, and the faded letters of its name were barely visible on the crumbling walls. Mateus checked his surroundings carefully before stepping out of the car. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, and the silence was oppressive. As he approached the mill, he unfolded the map once more. The X seemed to mark a spot inside the building, near the northern corner. His pulse quickened as he stepped through the open doorway, the wood creaking under his weight. Inside, the air was cool and damp, the light filtering through cracks in the walls. Dust motes danced in the faint beams of sunlight. Mateus followed the map's instructions, weaving through rusted machinery and piles of debris. When he reached the marked location, he stopped. At first, he saw nothing but a collapsed table and a few scattered crates. Then, as he moved closer, something caught his eye, a small metal box tucked beneath a sheet of corrugated tin. He knelt down, his fingers trembling as he lifted the tin and pulled the box free. It was heavy, with a sturdy padlock securing its lid. There was no key in sight. Mateus sighed, frustrated. He examined the box more closely, noticing faint markings scratched into its surface. One word stood out: redemption. "What does that mean?" he muttered. Before he could ponder further, the sound of footsteps echoed through the mill. Mateus froze, his heart pounding. Someone was coming. Quickly, he tucked the box into his bag and moved behind one of the large machines. Crouching low, the footsteps grew louder, deliberate and unhurried, as if the person knew exactly where they were going. A shadow stretched across the floor, long and sharp. Mateus held his breath as the figure stepped into view. A tall man in a dark suit, his face partially obscured by the brim of a hat. The man stopped in the center of the room, glancing around with a calculating gaze. Mateus's chest tightened. The man looked professional, out of place in the mill's dilapidated surroundings. Was he connected to the black car? The man pulled out a phone and spoke into it, his voice low but firm. "No sign of him yet. Keep the perimeter covered. He has to come back for it." Mateus's blood ran cold. "They're looking for the box." Carefully, he edged farther behind the machine, trying to stay out of sight. His heart raced as he weighed his options. Should he try to escape quietly, or wait for the man to leave? Before he could decide, the man's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then turned and walked out of the mill, his footsteps fading into the distance. Mateus waited a few agonizing minutes before daring to move. When he finally stepped out from behind the machine, he felt a wave of relief. The man was gone, but the sense of danger lingered. Back in his car, Mateus gripped the steering wheel tightly. His mind raced with questions. Who was that man? How did he know about the box? And why had Alfredo, or whoever he was, led Mateus to it in the first place? He glanced at the box on the passenger seat, its scratched surface glinting in the fading sunlight. Whatever secrets it held, Mateus was determined to uncover them. That evening, Mateus returned to the hospital. Livia greeted him in the hallway, her face lined with worry. "Where have you been?" she asked. "I've been calling you all day." "I had to follow a lead," he said vaguely, not wanting to alarm her. "How's Julia?" Livia sighed. "The same. They're still running tests. The doctor wants to talk to us tomorrow morning about the next steps." Mateus nodded, his chest tightening. The weight of everything, Julia's illness, the mystery of Alfredo, the danger at the mill, was beginning to feel unbearable. Later that night, as Livia slept in the hospital chair, Mateus sat by Julia's bed, the box hidden under his jacket. He stared at her peaceful face, his resolve hardening. Whatever this was, whatever Alfredo had left him, he would find out. For Julia, for Livia, and for the truth. Cliffhanger. As Mateus drifts into a restless sleep, a nurse enters the room and places another envelope on the bedside table. This one bears a single word: trust. The faint glow of the hospital monitors cast flickering shadows across the room as Mateus stared at the envelope on the bedside table. The word trust was written in bold, clean handwriting, the same handwriting as the previous notes. Mateus's pulse quickened. He grabbed the envelope, careful not to wake Livia or Julia. It was light, the contents thin, almost insubstantial. Sliding it open, he found a single sheet of paper with another handwritten message. "The answers lie within. Redemption is never free." He flipped the note over, hoping for more information, but it was blank on the back. Frustrated, he stuffed it into his pocket and turned his attention to the metal box resting beneath his jacket on the chair. Its scratched surface seemed to glint mockingly in the dim light. What was inside? And how could he open it? The word redemption, etched into its surface, echoed in his mind, pulling him deeper into a web of questions. For now, he had no choice but to keep it hidden. The next morning, Mateus and Livia met with the doctor in a private consultation room. The air was heavy, and Mateus could feel Livia's tension radiating beside him. "We've ruled out some possibilities," the doctor began, his voice calm but measured. "However, we're still waiting for a few key results. Julia's symptoms suggest a rare metabolic disorder, but we'll need additional tests to confirm." "What does that mean for her?" Livia asked, her voice trembling. "It means she'll need specialized treatment," the doctor replied. "It's not life-threatening if managed correctly, but it will be a long process. For now, she's stable, and we're doing everything we can." Mateus nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. The costs of this treatment were already spiraling out of control. The mysterious envelope of money had bought them time, but it wouldn't be enough for what lay ahead. He glanced at Livia, her face pale and drawn. He needed answers. About the money, about the box, about why Alfredo had chosen him for this bizarre game of riddles. That afternoon, Mateus decided to visit Lucas again. If anyone knew more about Alfredo or the strange messages, it was the boy who had held on to the map. When Mateus pulled up to Lucas's house, the boy was in the front yard, kicking a worn soccer ball against a makeshift goal. His face lit up when he saw Mateus step out of the car. "Mr. Lucas called, jogging over to meet him. "Did you figure it out? What was at the mill?" Mateus hesitated, glancing toward the house where Lucas's grandmother was tending to her garden. He didn't want to alarm her, so he lowered his voice. "I found a box. It's locked, and I don't have the key, but I think Alfredo wanted me to have it." Lucas's eyes widened. "Can I see it?" Mateus retrieved the box from his car and set it on the hood, watching as Lucas examined it with a mix of curiosity and excitement. "Whoa," Lucas whispered, tracing the scratched word redemption with his finger. "This is cool. But why would he give you a locked box without the key?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Mateus said. "Do you know if Alfredo left anything else for me? A key, a clue, anything?" Lucas frowned, deep in thought. "I don't think so. But wait." His face brightened. Alfredo had this old notebook he used to carry around. He always said it was full of important stuff. Maybe the keys mentioned in there. "Do you know where the notebook is?" Mateus asked, his hope rekindled. Lucas nodded. "It's in the shed. I'll go get it." Mateus followed Lucas to a small wooden shed at the back of the property. Inside, the air was musty, filled with the scent of damp wood and old tools. Lucas rummaged through a shelf cluttered with jars of nails and scraps of paper before pulling out a worn leather notebook. "Here it is," he said, handing it to Mateus. The notebook felt heavy in Mateus's hands, its cover soft with age. He flipped it open, scanning the pages filled with Alfredo's neat handwriting. There were notes, diagrams, and even a few sketches, but one page in particular caught his eye. It was a list of names, each accompanied by a date. Mateus's breath hitched when he saw his father's name near the top of the list. Beside it, in smaller writing, were the words, "Owed, never repaid." "What is this?" Mateus murmured, his fingers tracing the words. Lucas peered over his shoulder. "Looks like a ledger or something. Are those people Alfredo owed money to?" Mateus shook his head. "Not money. This is something else." Below the list, another entry caught his attention. "The box holds what was taken. Only the worthy may reclaim it." "What does that mean?" Lucas asked, his brow furrowed. "I don't know," Mateus admitted. "But I'm starting to think Alfredo wasn't just some old man. He was trying to fix something. Maybe something he felt guilty about." As they exited the shed, Lucas's grandmother called out from the porch. "Lucas, time to wash up for lunch." Lucas glanced at Mateus, his expression conflicted. "You're not leaving yet, are you?" Mateus smiled faintly. "I have to keep following the clues, but I'll come back if I learn anything new." "Okay," Lucas said reluctantly, "but be careful. Whoever left that box for you probably doesn't want you opening it." Mateus didn't respond, but the boy's words stayed with him as he drove away. Back at his car, Mateus studied the notebook more closely. The entries seemed to span decades, documenting interactions, debts, and promises Alfredo had made. One passage stood out, written in bold letters near the center of the notebook. "To undo what was done, you must first face what you've become." The words unsettled him. Was this some kind of test? What did Alfredo know about him that made him the chosen recipient of the box? Mateus's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Livia. "Where are you?" she asked, her tone edged with worry. "The doctor wants us to meet with a specialist tomorrow. He said the test results are almost ready." "I'm on my way back," Mateus said, glancing at the box on the passenger seat. "I'll be there soon." As he ended the call, a sense of urgency settled over him. Time was running out, not just for Julia's treatment, but for uncovering the truth. That night, Mateus sat in the dimly lit hospital room, the box resting on his lap. Livia was asleep again, and Julia's steady breathing filled the silence. He traced the word redemption on the lid, his mind racing with questions. The notebook had offered pieces of the puzzle, but no definitive answers. As he leaned back in his chair, something sharp jabbed against his leg. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out the envelope with the word trust written on it. For a moment, he considered throwing it away, but instead, he opened it again and studied the handwriting carefully. Then it struck him. The strokes of the letters, particularly the way the T was crossed, matched Alfredo's handwriting in the notebook. The notes in the notebook came from the same hand. "Alfredo," Mateus whispered, staring at the box. "What did you want me to find?" Cliffhanger. As Mateus contemplates his next move, a soft knock at the hospital door startles him. When he opens it, no one is there, but a key tied to a red string is hanging on the handle. The hospital hallway was eerily silent, broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights. Mateus stared at the key dangling from the red string on the door handle, his pulse quickening. It was a simple key, small, tarnished, and unassuming. Yet it radiated significance, as if it carried the weight of answers he desperately sought. He stepped out of the room, glancing down both ends of the corridor. They were empty. Whoever had left the key was gone. Mateus's grip tightened around the red string as he pulled the key free. He stared at it for a long moment, turning it over in his hand. Was this what he needed to unlock the box? And if so, who had delivered it? Back in the room, Livia stirred from her restless sleep, blinking groggily as she saw Mateus sitting at the small table, the metal box before him. The key glinted in his hand. "What's that?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Mateus hesitated, unsure of how much to tell her. "A clue," he said finally. "Something that might help us." "Help us how?" Livia frowned, sitting up straighter. "Mateus, you've been acting strange for days. Running off, keeping secrets. What's going on?" He sighed, rubbing his temple. "I don't know how to explain it, Livia. It started with that man I met on the road, Alfredo. He gave me his number and then he died. But somehow, he left behind all these clues. This box, these notes. It feels like he's trying to tell me something important. Clues." Livia's frown deepened. "Mateus, we have a sick daughter, mounting bills, and no clear answers from the doctors. Why are you chasing after riddles from a dead man?" "Because," Mateus said, his voice firm, "whoever Alfredo was, he knew something. The money he left for Julia's treatment didn't come out of nowhere. And I think this box, whatever's inside, might hold the key to everything." Livia stared at him, her expression torn between disbelief and reluctant understanding. Finally, she nodded. "Just don't let this distract you from what really matters, okay? Julia needs us. I won't, Mateus promised, though his gaze lingered on the box. Once Livia fell back asleep, Mateus couldn't wait any longer. He slid the key into the box's padlock, his hands trembling slightly. The lock clicked open with surprising ease, and he removed it, setting it aside. The lid creaked as he lifted it, revealing the box's contents. Inside was a stack of documents, neatly tied with a faded blue ribbon. Beneath the papers lay a small leather pouch, its edges worn with age. Mateus pulled out the papers first, carefully untying the ribbon. The top sheet was a letter, handwritten in the same neat script as Alfredo's notes. To Mateus Correa, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer here to explain myself. I owe you and your family a debt I can never repay. Years ago, my actions set off a chain of events that took more from your family than you will ever know. Your father, João Correa, was one of the finest men I ever knew. He worked for me at a time when my business was crumbling, and I made choices I deeply regret. To save myself, I sacrificed him. His dismissal left your family in ruin, and I have carried the guilt of that decision every day since. The contents of this box are meant to right that wrong. The documents will reveal the truth about what happened, but they also hold the key to rebuilding what was taken. Use them wisely. Mateus's hand shook as he set the letter down. His father, memories of João Correa flooded his mind. Memories of a strong, kind man who had worked tirelessly to provide for his family, only to lose everything in the blink of an eye. Mateus had been too young to understand the details, but he remembered the hardship that followed. The move to a smaller home, his parents' whispered arguments about money, his father's gradual decline. Beneath the letter, the remaining documents confirmed Alfredo's confession. There were employment records, termination notices, and a signed agreement between Alfredo and another man, Ricardo Duarte. Mateus's heart sank as he read the agreement. Ricardo had been Alfredo's business partner at the time, and the documents revealed that they had orchestrated mass layoffs to save their company. João had been one of the casualties. The name Ricardo Duarte struck a chord in Mateus's memory. He was now a prominent businessman, his name frequently appearing in news articles and local headlines. Was Ricardo connected to the mysterious car that had been following him? Setting the papers aside, Mateus reached for the leather pouch at the bottom of the box. It jingled faintly as he lifted it, and when he opened it, he found a collection of coins inside. They weren't ordinary coins. Each one was engraved with a date and a name. Mateus picked up the first coin, reading the name aloud. João Correa, 1996. His father's name. Another coin bore the name Lucas Almeida, the boy he had met. And then another name caught his attention, Mateus Correa. "Why is my name here?" he whispered, turning the coin over in his hand. On the back of the coin was a single word, choice. As Mateus tried to make sense of it all, his phone buzzed on the table. The screen displayed an unknown number. Hesitating for only a moment, he answered. "Hello." A familiar voice responded, low and steady. "Mr. Correa, I believe you found something that doesn't belong to you." Mateus's grip on the phone tightened. "Who is this?" "Someone who has an interest in that box," the voice replied. "You should return it before you get yourself into trouble." "Ricardo," Mateus said, his voice cold. The man on the other end chuckled. "Smart, but not smart enough to leave well enough alone. You don't know what you're playing with, Correa. Give me the box, and I'll make sure you and your family are left in peace." Mateus's jaw clenched. "If you think I'm just going to hand this over, you're wrong. I know what you did, to my father, to others. The truth is coming out." "You don't understand what you're risking," Ricardo said, his tone darkening. "This isn't just about you. Think about your wife, your daughter." Mateus's blood ran cold. "Stay away from my family," he growled. The line went dead. For a long moment, Mateus sat frozen, the phone still clutched in his hand. Ricardo's threat echoed in his mind, but it only strengthened his resolve. He had a choice to make. Alfredo had left him with the means to expose the truth, but doing so would put his family at risk. Mateus glanced at the coin with his name on it, the word choice gleaming under the faint hospital light. Cliffhanger. As Mateus resolves to confront Ricardo, his phone buzzes again. This time, it's a message with a single location pin. Beneath it, the words, "Come alone or lose everything." Mateus stared at the message on his phone, his chest tightening. The location pin pointed to an industrial area on the outskirts of the city, a place known for its abandoned warehouses and isolated streets. Beneath the pin, the words "come alone or lose everything" glared back at him. Ricardo's threat hung heavy in his mind. For days, Mateus had been following Alfredo's trail, uncovering pieces of a puzzle that felt both deeply personal and maddeningly cryptic. Now! The stakes were clear. Ricardo wanted the box, and he wouldn't hesitate to involve Mateus's family to get it. Mateus's first instinct was to tell Livia and go to the police, but he hesitated. He had no concrete proof of Ricardo's involvement beyond the documents in the box, and involving the authorities might escalate the danger to Julia and Livia. His grip tightened on the coin bearing his name and the word choice. He didn't feel like he had won. The decision to go. Later that night, with Livia asleep in the hospital chair and Julia resting peacefully, Mateus made his decision. He couldn't risk Ricardo following through on his threats. If there was even a chance of protecting his family, he had to confront Ricardo directly. Mateus tucked the box under his arm, stuffing the coins and documents into a backpack. Before leaving, he scribbled a note for Livia and left it on the table. "I'll be back soon. Don't worry about me. Take care of Julia. I love you." The drive to the industrial zone was tense and silent. The city's lights faded into the distance as Mateus entered the shadowy outskirts. Rows of warehouses loomed on either side of the narrow road, their windows dark and broken. The pin led him to a warehouse near the edge of the area, its rusted metal doors partially ajar. He parked his car a short distance away and got out, his backpack slung over one shoulder. The air was cold and still, amplifying every sound. The crunch of gravel under his shoes, the faint creak of the wind against the warehouse walls. Mateus stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through cracks in the roof. The interior was vast and empty, save for a few scattered crates and barrels. His footsteps echoed loudly as he moved farther in. "Mr. Correa." The voice came from the shadows ahead, smooth and calculated. Ricardo stepped into the light, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete floor. He was tall, with a sharp suit that seemed out of place in the grimy setting. "You've been busy," Ricardo said, his tone almost amused. "Chasing ghosts, uncovering secrets. I have to admit, I'm impressed." Mateus glared at him, tightening his grip on the backpack. "Why are you doing this?" "Alfredo wanted me to have the box. He wanted the truth to come out." Ricardo smirked. Alfredo was a fool, blinded by guilt. He thought he could fix the past with a few dramatic gestures. But the past is the past, Mr. Correa. Digging it up only leads to pain. "For you, maybe," Mateus shot back. "You betrayed my father, destroyed his life, and you want me to let that go? That's not going to happen." Ricardo's expression darkened. "Your father was collateral damage in a much larger game. Alfredo and I made choices to save our company, and it worked. If you think you can undo all of that with a dusty box and some old documents, you're mistaken." Mateus unzipped the backpack, pulling out the box and holding it up. "This isn't just about documents. It's about redemption, something you clearly know nothing about." Ricardo's eyes flicked to the box, his composure slipping for the first time. "Hand it over, Mateus. I'll make sure you and your family are left in peace." Mateus shook his head. "You think I'd trust you after everything you've done? I'm taking this to the public. People deserve to know what you are." Ricardo's expression hardened. "Then you leave me no choice." The fight for the truth. Before Mateus could react, a second figure emerged from the shadows, a burly man in dark clothing, clearly hired muscle. The man lunged at Mateus, grabbing for the box. Mateus twisted away, clutching the box tightly as he stumbled backward. The man advanced, his heavy boots thudding against the floor. "Give it to me," the man growled, swiping at Mateus again. Desperate, Mateus swung the box like a weapon, striking the man's arm. The impact sent a jolt through his hands, but it gave him enough time to dart around a stack of crates. "Stop playing games, Mateus," Ricardo barked, his calm facade cracking. "You're out of your depth." Mateus ignored him, scanning the room for an escape route. His heart pounded as he ducked behind a column, the sound of the man's heavy breathing growing closer. The hired thug rounded the corner, and Mateus acted on instinct. He grabbed a loose metal pipe from the ground and swung it with all his strength. The pipe connected with the man's side, sending him staggering backward with a grunt of pain. Mateus didn't wait to see if he recovered. He bolted toward the open door, clutching the box tightly against his chest. "Stop him," Ricardo shouted, his voice echoing through the warehouse. Outside, the cold night air hit Mateus like a shock. He sprinted toward his car, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. Behind him, he could hear the sound of footsteps. Ricardo's men were chasing him, an unexpected ally. Just as Mateus reached his car, headlights flared to life a short distance away. A familiar figure stepped out of a truck and waved him over. "Get in," Lucas shouted. Mateus didn't hesitate. He threw the box into the truck's back seat and scrambled inside, slamming the door shut. "How did you find me?" Mateus asked, his voice breathless. "Grandma told me you left in a hurry," Lucas said, gunning the engine. "I tracked your phone. I thought you might need backup." Mateus shook his head, equal parts astonished and grateful. "You shouldn't have come. This is dangerous." Lucas grinned, his youthful confidence shining through. "Looks like I showed up just in time." The truck roared down the road, leaving the warehouse and Ricardo's men in the dust. A moment of clarity. As they drove, Mateus finally allowed himself to breathe. He looked over at Lucas, who was gripping the wheel tightly, his face set with determination. "You're brave," Mateus said. "Too brave for your own good." Lucas shrugged. Alfredo always said helping people was worth the risk. Mateus felt a lump rise in his throat. Alfredo's influence lingered, even now. In the back seat, the box sat undisturbed. The coins, the documents, the truth, they were still his to protect. But Ricardo wouldn't stop. Mateus turned to Lucas. "We need to figure out our next move. This isn't over." Lucas nodded, his eyes glinting with resolve. "Then let's make it count." Cliffhanger. As they approach the edge of town, Mateus's phone buzzes with a video message. It's from Ricardo, showing Livia and Julia in the hospital. Ricardo's voice snarls. "Come back with the box, or your family pays the price." Mateus's hands trembled as he stared at his phone screen. The video message played on a loop, Ricardo's cold voice repeating the threat. "Come back with the box, or your family pays the price." The image of Livia and Julia in the hospital, vulnerable and unaware, was enough to send a chill down his spine. Mateus's chest tightened, his breathing shallow. Ricardo had escalated the game, and now the stakes were higher than ever. "What's wrong?" Lucas asked from the driver's seat, his brow furrowed with concern. Mateus turned the phone toward Lucas, showing him the video. The boy's eyes widened in horror. "He's threatening your family? That's sick." Mateus clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "I should have seen this coming. Ricardo will do anything to protect himself, even if it means using Julia and Livia as leverage." Lucas gripped the steering wheel tighter. "What are you going to do?" Mateus took a deep breath, his mind racing. He knew that confronting Ricardo alone, without any leverage, would only make things worse. But he also couldn't risk his family's safety by staying on the run. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. We're not going back empty-handed, Mateus said firmly. Ricardo wants the box, but we're going to use it against him. How? Lucas asked, his voice laced with doubt. We expose him, Mateus replied, the conviction in his voice growing. We make sure he has no way to harm my family or anyone else. A desperate strategy. Mateus quickly scanned the documents inside the box, searching for anything he could use to publicly implicate Ricardo. The employment records and termination notices were damning enough, but there was something more significant buried beneath them. A signed financial statement from years ago. The document detailed a series of fraudulent transactions Ricardo had orchestrated, funneling money from the company into offshore accounts. Alfredo had added handwritten annotations, highlighting the extent of Ricardo's schemes. This is it, Mateus murmured, holding the paper up. This is what we need to bring him down. Lucas leaned over, peering at the document. That's proof, right? Enough to get the police involved. Mateus nodded. It's a start, but we can't go to the authorities just yet. Ricardo has people everywhere. If he finds out what we're doing, he'll strike first. So what do we do? Lucas asked, his voice tinged with urgency. Mateus's mind raced. He thought of Alfredo's words. The box holds what was taken. Only the worthy may reclaim it. Alfredo hadn't just left him a trail of clues. He'd left him a weapon. We go public, Mateus said finally. We release this information to the press. If the world sees what Ricardo has done, he won't have anywhere to hide. Lucas hesitated. But won't that put your family in more danger? Mateus's eyes hardened. It's a risk I have to take. If we stay quiet, Ricardo wins. If we fight back, we have a chance to stop him. A race against time. Lucas drove them to a nearby gas station, where Mateus used a payphone to contact a journalist he'd read about, Maria Valente, an investigative reporter known for exposing corruption. Maria, Mateus said when she answered. My name is Mateus Correa. I have information that could bring down Ricardo Duarte. It's big, but I need your help to make it public. There was a pause on the line, and then Maria's sharp voice cut through. Ricardo Duarte? That's a dangerous name to throw around. Do you have proof? I do, Mateus said, glancing at the box in the truck. Documents, records, everything you need. But Ricardo knows I have it, and he's already threatened my family. If you want this story, you'll have to act fast. Maria didn't hesitate. Meet me at the old newspaper building downtown in an hour, and bring everything you have. Mateus hung up, feeling a glimmer of hope. This was the first step toward turning the tide. The meeting, the old newspaper building, was dark and deserted. Its once bustling halls now silent and filled with shadows. Mateus and Lucas arrived just after sunset, parking the truck a block away to avoid being spotted. Inside, Maria Valente was waiting. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 40s, with piercing eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Let me see what you've got, she said, skipping pleasantries. Mateus handed over the documents, explaining everything he'd uncovered. Alfredo's confession, the fraudulent transactions, and Ricardo's connection to his father's downfall. Maria's eyes widened as she skimmed the pages, her expression shifting from curiosity to grim determination. This is enough to bury him, she said, but it's going to take time to verify everything and write the story. You're sure he doesn't know you're here? Mateus hesitated. I don't think so, but he's not the type to sit and wait. Maria nodded. Then we need to move fast. I'll contact my editor and get this ready for publication. In the meantime, you should find a safe place to stay. Ricardo won't go down without a fight. As Maria packed up the documents, Lucas tugged on Mateus's sleeve. Someone's outside, the boy whispered. Mateus turned toward the window. In the dim light, he saw the outline of a black car parked across the street. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. They've found us, Mateus said. The chase. Before they could react, The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the building. Ricardo's men were here. "Get out the back," Maria hissed, shoving the documents into her bag. "I'll hold them off." "Maria, you can't," Mateus began, but she cut him off. "Go. This story's bigger than me. Get those documents out of here." Reluctantly, Mateus grabbed Lucas's arm and pulled him toward the back exit. They sprinted down the dark hallway, the sound of footsteps and shouting growing louder behind them. Bursting out into the alley, Mateus and Lucas ran toward the truck. The black car was still parked nearby, its engine idling ominously. "Get in," Mateus shouted, tossing the box into the back seat. Lucas scrambled into the driver's seat and started the engine just as two men emerged from the building, their faces shadowed but unmistakably hostile. "Go, go, go," Mateus yelled. Lucas slammed on the gas, the truck lurching forward as the black car roared to life behind them. The final warning. The chase through the city streets was chaotic and tense. Ricardo's men were relentless, their car tailing the truck at every turn. Lucas drove with surprising skill, weaving through traffic and taking sharp corners that left the pursuers struggling to keep up. "Do you even have a license?" Mateus asked, clutching the dashboard. Lucas grinned despite the tension. "Not yet, but I've played enough racing games to know what I'm doing." As they approached a busy intersection, Lucas made a sudden, sharp turn down a narrow alley. The black car followed, but its larger size made it harder to maneuver. "Good thinking," Mateus said. They emerged onto a side street and sped away, leaving their pursuers behind, at least for now. The crossroads. When they finally reached a safe distance, Lucas pulled the truck into an empty parking lot. Both of them were breathing heavily, the adrenaline still coursing through their veins. "What now?" Lucas asked, his voice trembling slightly. Mateus glanced at the box, the weight of Alfredo's legacy pressing down on him. "We wait for Maria to publish the story. Once it's out, Ricardo won't have the power to hurt us. But until then, we stay one step ahead." As the night stretched on, Mateus couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Ricardo wasn't the type to back down, and the next move would be the most dangerous yet. Cliffhanger. Mateus receives a text from Maria. "The story is ready. Meet me at the old mill in 1 hour. Bring the box." The message from Maria burned on Mateus's phone screen like a flare in the dark. "The story is ready. Meet me at the old mill in 1 hour. Bring the box." He stared at it for a long moment, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. The old mill wasn't a place for a safe meeting. It was abandoned, isolated, and above all, linked to Alfredo's mysterious trail. Why would Maria choose such a place? Lucas leaned over from the passenger seat, reading the message. "The mill again? That doesn't feel right," he said, voicing the exact thought running through Mateus's mind. Mateus nodded. "I don't like it either, but if she has the story ready, we don't have a choice. This needs to end tonight." Lucas hesitated, his expression conflicted. What if it's a trap? Mateus looked at the boy, his own uncertainty reflected in Lucas's eyes. "We'll be careful, but we can't stop now. If Ricardo gets to Maria before we do, everything Alfredo left behind will be for nothing." The road to the mill. As they drove toward the mill, the atmosphere inside the truck was heavy with tension. The road felt longer than before, its shadows deeper and more menacing. Mateus gripped the steering wheel tightly, his thoughts swirling. The box sat in the back seat, its metal surface catching faint glimmers of light from passing street lamps. It felt heavier than it should, as if the secrets inside were weighing down not just the vehicle, but Mateus's entire being. Lucas fidgeted in his seat, breaking the silence. "What's the plan when we get there?" Mateus sighed. "We see if Maria's really there. If she has the story, we hand over the documents. But we don't trust anyone until we know it's safe." "And if Ricardo's there instead?" Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mateus glanced at the boy, his jaw tightening. Then we fight. We don't let him win. Arrival at the mill. The mill loomed ahead, its silhouette stark against the moonlit sky. The structure looked more foreboding than before, its broken windows and crumbling walls casting jagged shadows. Mateus parked the truck a short distance away, cutting the engine. He and Lucas sat in silence, studying the scene. A single light glowed faintly from inside the mill, flickering like a beacon. "That's not ominous at all," Lucas muttered, his attempt at humor falling flat. Mateus forced a faint smile. "Stay close to me, and if anything happens, you run." "I'm not leaving you," Lucas said firmly. Mateus didn't argue. He grabbed the box from the back seat and the flashlight from the glove compartment, then stepped out of the truck. Lucas followed close behind. The trap springs. As they entered the mill, the faint light grew brighter, illuminating the cavernous interior. The old machinery cast long, twisted shadows across the floor. "Maria?" Mateus called, his voice echoing off the walls. There was no response. The only sound was the faint creak of the wind through the broken windows. "This feels wrong," Lucas whispered, sticking close to Mateus's side. Suddenly, the light flickered and went out, plunging the mill into darkness. "Mateus Correa." A voice boomed, cutting through the silence like a blade. Mateus's blood ran cold. It was Ricardo. "You've been quite the nuisance," Ricardo continued, his tone calm but laced with menace. "Chasing ghosts, digging up the past. But it all ends here." The sound of footsteps echoed from multiple directions. Mateus gripped the box tightly, his pulse racing. "Where's Maria?" he demanded. Ricardo chuckled. "Oh, Maria's fine. For now. But she won't be telling your little story. Not if you hand over the box." Mateus's eyes darted around the darkness, searching for movement. "You think I'd trust you to let her go? To leave my family alone?" "You don't have a choice," Ricardo replied. "Give me the box, or everything you love burns." A desperate standoff. Lucas tugged on Mateus's sleeve. "We can't let him have it," the boy whispered. "Alfredo trusted you with this." Mateus nodded, his mind racing. Ricardo's men were closing in, their footsteps growing louder. He needed to buy time. "Why does this box matter so much to you, Ricardo?" Mateus called out. "What are you so afraid of?" Ricardo stepped into the faint moonlight, streaming through a broken window, his face a mask of cold determination. "That box contains more than just documents. It holds the key to everything I built, and I won't let you take it from me." Mateus's grip on the box tightened. "You mean the lies you've built, the people you've hurt? Alfredo wanted this truth to come out, and I'm going to make sure it does." Ricardo sneered. "Alfredo was a sentimental fool, trying to undo mistakes that couldn't be fixed. Don't make the same mistake, Mateus. Hand it over, and I'll let you and your family walk away." Before Mateus could respond, a loud crash echoed through the mill. One of Ricardo's men had knocked over a pile of crates, revealing Lucas crouched behind them. "There's the boy!" Ricardo shouted. "Get him!" The fight for the box. Everything happened in a blur. Two of Ricardo's men lunged toward Lucas, but Mateus stepped in their path, swinging the heavy metal box like a weapon. The first man staggered back, clutching his shoulder, while the second grabbed Mateus's arm. "Run, Lucas!" Mateus yelled, struggling against the man's grip. But Lucas didn't run. Instead, he grabbed a piece of broken pipe from the ground and swung it with surprising force, striking one of the men in the leg. "Nice shot," Mateus said, managing to wrench himself free. Ricardo watched the chaos unfold, his expression twisting with rage. "Enough of this," he barked. "Bring me the box." One of his men lunged for the box again, but Mateus was quicker. He swung the lid open, pulling out the documents and holding them high. "This is your legacy, Ricardo," Mateus shouted. "Fraud, betrayal, and lies." You can't bury it anymore. Ricardo's eyes widened with fury. You think anyone will believe you? I have more power, more connections than you can imagine. Then why are you so afraid of the truth? Mateus retorted, a narrow escape. As the confrontation reached its peak, the distant sound of sirens cut through the night. Ricardo froze, his eyes darting toward the entrance. Looks like someone called for backup, Lucas said with a sly grin. Ricardo snarled, signaling his men to retreat. This isn't over, Correa. You've made a powerful enemy tonight. As Ricardo and his men fled into the shadows, Mateus and Lucas stood in the center of the mill, breathing heavily. Did you call the police? Mateus asked, turning to Lucas. The boy shook his head. Not me. Before Mateus could respond, Maria emerged from the shadows, holding her phone. That would be me, she said, her voice steady. Figured we'd need some extra help. Mateus stared at her, a wave of relief washing over him. You're okay? Maria nodded. Ricardo tried to stop me, but I'm not that easy to scare. The story's already with my editor. By morning, the whole world will know who Ricardo Duarte really is. As the sirens grew louder, Mateus looked down at the box in his hands, his thoughts racing. Ricardo was on the run, but his warning echoed in Mateus's mind. This isn't over. The sound of sirens grew louder as the police cars pulled into the abandoned mill. Red and blue lights flashed against the crumbling walls, painting the scene with an eerie vibrancy. Mateus stood in the center of the chaos, clutching the metal box like a lifeline. His heart raced as officers emerged from their vehicles, their weapons drawn, barking orders into the night. Maria stepped forward, raising her hands in a gesture of calm. I'm Maria Valente, investigative journalist. I called you. There's evidence here that will expose Ricardo Duarte for corruption and fraud. One of the officers nodded and motioned for his team to fan out, securing the area. Ricardo and his men were gone, having melted into the shadows of the night. But their threats lingered like smoke in Mateus's mind. Lucas stood at Mateus's side, his small frame stiff with tension. Did we win? He whispered. Mateus didn't answer immediately. His eyes drifted to the box in his hands. Not yet, he said softly, but we're close. Unveiling the truth. Inside the mill, the tension began to ease as the officers conducted their sweep. Maria, now surrounded by the glow of police flashlights, addressed the officers with confidence. These documents, she said, holding up the evidence Mateus had given her, contain proof of Ricardo Duarte's crimes. Fraudulent transactions, embezzlement, and his involvement in destroying the lives of dozens of workers, including Mateus Correa's family. The lead officer took the documents, glancing at Mateus. You're the one who brought this forward? Yes, Mateus said, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. Ricardo's actions destroyed my father's life and countless others. It's time the world knew the truth. Maria added, the story's already with my editor. By tomorrow morning, it'll be public. Ricardo won't be able to run from this. The officer nodded, slipping the documents into a secure evidence bag. We'll start a manhunt for Duarte. With this evidence in your testimony, we'll bring him to justice. For the first time in days, Mateus felt a flicker of hope. The truth was out, and Ricardo's empire of lies was beginning to crumble. The return home. The drive back to the hospital was quiet. Lucas sat beside Mateus in the truck, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, but his expression one of quiet triumph. You did it, Lucas said finally, breaking the silence. Mateus glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. We did it. I couldn't have done this without you. Lucas shrugged, his cheeks flushing slightly. Alfredo would have been proud. He believed in you, you know. Mateus's grip on the steering wheel tightened at the mention of Alfredo. The old man's enigmatic presence had been the catalyst for everything, his cryptic trail of clues forcing Mateus to confront not only Ricardo's corruption, but also his own fears and doubts. "I just hope I honored him," Mateus said quietly. "You did," Lucas replied with certainty. When they reached the hospital, the first rays of dawn were peeking over the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. Mateus parked the truck and turned to Lucas. "This is where we part ways for now," he said. "You need to go home, get some rest." Lucas hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave. "Will you be okay?" Mateus nodded. "I will, thanks to you." With a small smile, Lucas stepped out of the truck and waved before disappearing down the street. A father's resolve. Inside the hospital, Mateus found Livia awake, sitting beside Julia's bed. She looked up as he entered, her eyes filled with worry and relief. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I woke up and you were gone." Mateus placed a box on the table and sat beside her, taking her hands in his. "I had to finish something. For Julia. For us." Livia frowned, her gaze flicking to the box. "What's in there? What's so important that you'd risk everything?" Mateus took a deep breath and explained everything. The truth about Alfredo, the documents exposing Ricardo, and the lengths Ricardo had gone to protect his secrets. He told her about the chase at the mill and how the evidence was now in the hands of the police and the press. When he finished, Livia stared at him, her expression a mix of shock and awe. "You did all that for us?" "For you," Mateus said. "For Julia. For my father. I couldn't let Ricardo win. Not after everything he's taken from us." Livia's eyes softened and she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "You're braver than I realized," she whispered. Mateus smiled faintly, his heart swelling with a mix of relief and love. A new beginning. The next morning, the news broke. Maria's article was published, and Ricardo Duarte's name was splashed across headlines and television screens. The story was damning, detailing decades of fraud, corruption, and the exploitation of vulnerable workers. Calls for justice flooded social media, and the police launched an official investigation. Ricardo's assets were frozen, and warrants were issued for his arrest. Mateus watched the coverage from Julia's hospital room, his heart pounding with a mix of vindication and uncertainty. The fight wasn't over. Ricardo was still out there, but his power was crumbling. As Mateus turned off the TV, Julia stirred in her bed, blinking up at him with sleepy eyes. "Dad," she murmured. Mateus leaned over, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm here, sweetheart." "Did you fix it?" she asked, her voice faint but hopeful. Mateus smiled, his eyes misting. "I think so. Or at least, I've started to." A visit from the past. A week later, as life began to settle, Mateus received an unexpected visitor. Lucas and his grandmother arrived at the hospital, carrying a small envelope. "What's this?" Mateus asked, taking the envelope. "It's from Alfredo," Lucas said, his voice filled with emotion. Mateus opened the envelope carefully, revealing a handwritten note. Asterisco, asterisco, Mateus. If you're reading this, it means you face your fears and found the strength to fight for what matters. Redemption isn't about undoing the past. It's about building a better future. Keep going. Your family, your community, and your legacy depend on it. Alfredo, asterisk, asterisk. Mateus stared at the note, his chest tightening. Alfredo's words were both a challenge and a blessing, a reminder that his journey wasn't over. Lucas smiled. He knew you'd make the right choice. Mateus folded the note and placed it carefully in his pocket. He believed in all of us. The legacy lives on. As the weeks turned into months, Ricardo was captured and brought to trial. The documents in Maria's reporting sealed his fate, and he was sentenced to prison for his crimes. Mateus used the remaining funds Alfredo had left behind to create a foundation in his father's name, dedicated to helping workers and families impacted by corporate greed. At home, Julia's health improved under the care of specialists, and Mateus and Livia found a renewed sense of purpose in rebuilding their lives. One evening, as Mateus sat in his study, the metal box resting on the shelf behind him, he glanced at the coin with his name engraved on it. Choice. He smiled, knowing Alfredo had been right. Redemption wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about choosing to create something better. Cliffhanger resolvido. Mateus, now a changed man, looks out at the horizon. His journey is far from over, but he's ready for whatever comes next. Enjoy the story. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Share your thoughts in the comments and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next thrilling episode. See you in our next video. Take care.